When I bought my farm 3 years ago, I thought I'd finally found peace. No noisy neighbors. No drama. Just open land, a quiet place to breathe, and a small, rustic house I couldn't wait to restore. It was everything I had ever wanted: rolling fields, a tree line at the back, and an old padlocked gate at the front. Simple, private, and entirely mine. But then she showed up. Karen, as I'll call her, the HOA president from the neighboring subdivision. At first, I figured she was just being friendly. She introduced herself the day I was unloading my last few moving boxes, flashing one of those overly bright smiles that never quite feels genuine. She explained that she ran the HOA for the development down the road, cookie-cutter homes lined up about half a mile away. She said something like, "We like to keep the neighborhood looking nice." I nodded politely and let her know that I wasn't part of the HOA. My property wasn't even in their district. She laughed, nervously, and said, "Oh, of course not. But, you know, it's always good to be a good neighbor." That phrase stuck with me. It didn't mean much then, but I'd come to hate those words later. A few weeks passed, and Karen came by again. This time, I was outside working on the old gate. It was a heavy, rusted thing, but it did the job, keeping the property secure and giving me the privacy I valued. I'd just finished repainting it when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Karen was standing there with that same forced smile, holding a plate of cookies. "I thought I'd bring you these," she said. "Just a little welcome gift." I thanked her, and we chatted for a minute. Then, casually, she nodded toward the gate. "You know," she said, "some of the folks in our neighborhood have been wondering why it's locked. Such a lovely stretch of land, it's a shame to keep it closed off." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's private property," I said. "I enjoy the privacy." Her smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, of course. Of course. I just meant it's the kind of place people might enjoy walking through. You know. As good neighbors." There it was again. I chuckled politely and said something vague about liking my space. She nodded, but it was clear she wasn't thrilled with my response. "Before leaving," she added, "if you ever want to make improvements to the property, the HOA has resources. We're here to help." At the time, I thought she was just a bit pushy. I had no idea what she was really up to. Months went by peacefully. I kept busy with farm work, fixing up the place, and soaking in the quiet. Then, one evening, I checked my security camera. The feed showed Karen standing by the front gate with a clipboard. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at the gate, jotting down notes, and glancing around like she didn't want to be seen. Weird? Sure. But I brushed it off. Probably HOA stuff. Not worth the headache. Until the following weekend. I was clearing some brush by the tree line when I heard voices. I assumed it was coming from the road, but as I got closer to the fence, I spotted two strangers, inside my property. They were strolling along the edge of the field, pointing at things, chatting casually. "Trespassers." "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward them. The two strangers jumped, clearly startled, and immediately began stammering apologies. One of them, a woman in her 40s, said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Karen said it would be fine. She told us you wouldn't mind if we took a quick walk around." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Karen said what?" "She said this was part of the neighborhood," the woman explained, "and that it's open to residents. We just wanted to take a look." I was livid, but I managed to keep my composure. "This is private property," I said firmly. "Karen doesn't have any authority here. Please leave." They apologized again and hurried off, but I was left with far more questions than answers. Why would Karen tell people my land was part of the neighborhood? Was this some kind of honest mistake? Or was she trying to pull something? The next day, I decided to confront her directly. I went to the HOA office in the subdivision and asked to speak with Karen. She greeted me with her usual plastic smile, but there was something else behind her eyes, nervousness, maybe. When I brought up the trespassers, she was quick to respond. "Oh, that must have been a misunderstanding," she said a little too quickly. "I might have mentioned your property in passing. But I never told anyone they could go in. I didn't buy it." Her tone was too dismissive, too rehearsed. But without proof, I didn't have much to go on, so I let it drop, for now. Before I turned to leave, though, she added, "You know, if you ever want to join the HOA, we'd be happy to have you. It would make things so much simpler for everyone." That was when it all clicked. This wasn't about being friendly or neighborly. Karen wasn't just nosy, she was actively trying to bring my property under HOA control. And I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. That week, I installed more security cameras around my property. If Karen or any of her HOA followers were planning to keep pushing, I wanted to be ready. Sure enough, just a few nights later, the cameras caught her again, standing at the gate, taking more photos, jotting notes. Then came the letter. It was from the HOA. The first line read, "We've noticed that your property is not currently in compliance with HOA guidelines." Compliance? I wasn't even part of the HOA. It had started with an envelope on my doorstep. At first glance, I assumed it was another standard HOA notice and almost tossed it without opening it. But something about it felt off. There was no official HOA letterhead, just my name, handwritten on the front. Inside was a single typed page. "We, the members of the HOA, respectfully request that you reconsider your stance on allowing limited community access to your property. Such access would greatly benefit the neighborhood, foster goodwill, and align with the aesthetic and recreational goals of the community." At the bottom was a signature. Karen's. And beneath her name, a long list of other HOA members who had signed the petition. That's right, a petition. I'll admit, part of me laughed at the sheer audacity. My private land wasn't a community park, and the fact they thought a petition would convince me otherwise was laughable. But another part of me was furious. This wasn't just Karen anymore. She had clearly rallied half the neighborhood into her little campaign. And I had to wonder, what exactly was she telling these people to get them on board? Why were they all suddenly so obsessed with gaining limited access to my land? I needed answers. So I went straight to Karen's house. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked smug. "Oh, hi there," she said in that overly sweet tone she always used. I didn't bother with small talk. I held up the petition and cut straight to the point. "Care to explain this?" Karen glanced at it and shrugged. "Oh, that? It's just something a few of the neighbors wanted to do. No big deal." "No big deal?" I repeated. "Pressure? You're trying to pressure me into turning my private land into a public park for your neighborhood. That's a big deal, Karen." Her smile wavered for a split second before she quickly composed herself again. "It's not pressure," she said sweetly. "It's just encouragement. The neighborhood really admires your property, and we think it would be a wonderful addition to the community." I didn't even let her finish. "It's not part of the community," I snapped. "It's private property, and it's going to stay that way." This time, Karen's smile vanished completely. She crossed her arms and said coldly, "Well, I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. But if that's how you feel, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss." It was so dismissive I almost walked away. Almost. But the way she said it, like she already had another plan lined up, made me pause. Instead of leaving, I pushed back. "Why are you so interested in my land, Karen?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not. I mean, we're not. It's just. A lot of people feel like it would enhance the community, that's all." Her answer felt hollow, like something rehearsed. But I knew I wasn't going to get anything more from her, so I walked away. The next day, things started getting weird. First, I found trash scattered near the tree line, empty cans, food wrappers, even an old pair of shoes, just lying there. I figured maybe some local kids had wandered onto the land and dumped it, but the cameras didn't catch a thing. Then, 2 days later, I noticed tire tracks near the rear gate. Tracks that hadn't been there before. Again, no camera footage. But someone had clearly driven back there. And then came the real punch to the gut. One of my crop rows, a line of tomatoes I had been growing for months, was completely trampled. At first, I thought maybe deer had wandered through. But there were no hoof prints, just deep, deliberate footprints. Someone had walked straight through the row, crushing everything in their path. I was furious, but more than that, I was unsettled. It was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like a message. And I had a good idea who it was meant to be from. The final straw came a week later. I was walking the edge of my property, checking the perimeter, when I spotted something glinting in the dirt near the back fence. It was a crumpled, muddy piece of paper, but still legible. Another letter. This one wasn't like the others. It had an official HOA letterhead, stamped and typed out in stiff legal language. According to them, my fence was violating community standards and encroaching on HOA-controlled land. They were demanding I remove it immediately, or face further action. I was speechless. Not only was my property not part of the HOA, but I had double-checked the boundary lines when I first bought the place. My fence was 100% within my land. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Karen was trying to weaponize the entire HOA against me. It had officially become a war. So, I fought back. First, I hired a professional surveyor to re-verify the property lines. And as expected, the results confirmed everything I already knew. My fence was perfectly placed. But the survey revealed something even better. A small strip of land the HOA had landscaped, including a decorative sign and some bushes, was actually on my property. Armed with that information, I called a real estate attorney. He drafted a formal response to the HOA, demanding they cease all communication and harassment immediately, and that they remove their landscaping from my land. At the same time, I upgraded everything: security cameras, motion lights, clear no trespassing signs. If Karen and her cronies wanted a fight, I was going to make them work for it. For a few weeks, things went quiet. No letters. No uninvited visits. I didn't even see Karen around. I started to think maybe, just maybe, she'd finally given up. But I was wrong. One night, my security system caught something chilling: Karen back at the gate. Only this time, she wasn't alone. 2 other people were with her. One had a measuring tape. The other held what looked like a set of blueprints. They were standing there, pointing at my property and discussing something. I watched the footage in disbelief. What the hell was Karen planning now? The next morning, I decided to get some answers. I picked up the phone and called the law office responsible for the original HOA compliance letter, the one that falsely accused me of encroaching on their land. To be honest, I wasn't expecting much. When I called the HOA lawyer, I expected the usual legal mumbo-jumbo about community standards and misunderstandings. But instead, I got something unexpected: a crack in Karen's story. The lawyer actually sounded sheepish when I brought up the compliance letter. He stammered, hesitated, then finally said, "We were under the impression your property fell within HOA jurisdiction." Under the impression? I repeated, trying not to laugh. You didn't even check? Well, Mrs. Karen, the HOA president, provided documentation suggesting the property fell within HOA boundaries. If that's incorrect, we'd be happy to review. I cut him off. What documentation? There was a long silence before he finally admitted it. She said there were plans to annex the property into the HOA. Annex my property. I hung up and immediately called my attorney. This wasn't just Karen being nosy. This was a deliberate attempt to claim ownership over my land. And here's the thing: an HOA can't just decide to annex property. That requires city approval, legal filings, and, most importantly, Consent from the property owner. None of which Karen had. Fueled by equal parts rage and determination, I started digging deeper. I reached out to a friend of mine who works in local zoning and land use. Within hours, she sent me a file that nearly made my jaw hit the floor. Karen had submitted a formal request months ago to the city council, asking to annex my farm into her HOA. Her reasoning? She claimed the land was unmaintained and that placing it under HOA oversight would benefit the community. She even attached unauthorized photos of my farm and included a list of bogus complaints from supposed neighbors, saying my property was an eyesore and a nuisance. It was all lies. My farm was clean, thriving, and, until now, hadn't received a single complaint. But now I understood the bigger picture. Karen wasn't just harassing me, she was trying to force her HOA's rules onto my property and seize control. Her request was scheduled for review at the next city council meeting, in just 2 weeks. If it passed, I'd be forced under HOA control, stuck following ridiculous rules, and potentially unable to run my farm the way I wanted. So I did something Karen never expected. I went public. First, I printed copies of the survey that proved my fence was well within my property line, and that part of the HOA's decorative landscaping had actually been planted on my land. Then I gathered screenshots of Karen trespassing. Footage of her leading strangers onto my farm. A copy of the petition. A full timeline of the harassment. I posted everything online, tagging the local neighborhood forums, the city council, and even the HOA's own social media. I titled it, "The HOA President Who Tried to Steal My Farm." The response was immediate, and overwhelming. People I'd never met reached out to apologize for Karen's behavior. Several admitted they'd been pressured into signing the petition, thinking it was something harmless. But the real fireworks started when Karen's own HOA board found out what she had been doing. Turns out, she'd kept them in the dark, telling them she was just handling a difficult neighbor situation. Once they saw the evidence, several board members contacted me directly to distance themselves from her. One of them, Dave, a middle-aged guy who looked like he regretted ever signing up, confessed that Karen had used HOA funds to pay for the legal work and the landscaping near my fence. She said it was for the good of the neighborhood, he told me. But now it's clear she was just trying to take your land. With her board turning against her and the city council swamped with complaints, Karen's little empire started to crumble. But she wasn't done, not yet. The night before the council hearing, my security cameras caught her at it again. This time, she was trying to remove the no trespassing signs I had posted. She had bolt cutters in one hand and a flashlight in the other. I called the sheriff immediately. When deputies arrived, Karen tried playing the victim, claiming she was inspecting the property lines. But the officers reviewed my footage, saw the trespassing for themselves, and issued her a citation on the spot. She looked furious as they escorted her off my land. The next morning was the city council hearing. My attorney and I came prepared, with everything. The survey report, the trespassing footage, the timeline, even sworn statements from neighbors. Several residents showed up in person to support me. They publicly condemned Karen's behavior and demanded action. The council didn't just deny Karen's annexation request, they unanimously voted to launch an investigation into her conduct. They also flagged her use of HOA funds for review. Within weeks, Karen resigned from her position as HOA president under mounting pressure. Her attorney dropped her as a client. And the bushes and decorative signs she'd planted on my land? Quietly removed. As for me? I finally got the peace I had wanted when I first bought the farm. No more surprise letters. No more camera footage of random strangers. No more good neighbor speeches. Karen? I haven't seen her since. And the HOA? They haven't come near me again.